Abracadabra, a part with the past we must live. Avada Kedavra, bring Sigmund Freud from his cave.
Welcome to Biology, Grilling the Greats. Today we're speaking with none other than the father of psychoanalysis himself, Sigmund Freud.
Danke. Thank you. I'm intrigued by this idea of speaking to the future through these modern technologies.
So, let's start with your famous theory of the psyche. Could you give us an overview?
My theory of the psyche divides the mind into three distinct parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. Each plays a crucial role in how we think, feel, and behave.
Let's start with the id. What exactly is it?
It is the most basic part of our psyche, driven by unconscious desires and instincts. It operates on the pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification without concern for consequences. It's like a newborn, focused only on satisfying its needs.
Oh, so the id is all about I want it now. But we obviously don't always act on those impulses. How does that work?
That's where the ego comes into play. It operates on the reality principle, aiming to satisfy the id's desires in a socially acceptable way. The ego is rational and aware of consequences.
Oh, so the ego is like a negotiator, finding a middle ground between our primal desires and the real world. But then there's the superego, right?
The superego is the moral part of our psyche, shaped by societal norms and parental guidance. It acts as an internal judge, striving for perfection and making us feel guilty when we don't meet moral standards. It often conflicts with the id.
It seems like there's a lot of tension between these three parts. How do they all come together?
The interaction between the id, ego, and superego creates tension that shapes our behavior. The ego balances these desires, the superego's moral demands, and real-world realities. When these parts are in harmony, we achieve psychological well-being.
Fascinating. Could you enlighten the subject with the help of an example from your day and age?
I believe Pear soap was an intriguing brand in this regard.
Not was, is. Pears has truly stood the test of time.
Well, it's no surprise. The brand appealed to all the three personality components. Pear soap appeals to the basic desire for cleanliness, sensory pleasure, and a radiant appearance. The brand balances these desires with practical benefits, promoting itself as a gentle, safe, and effective soap that cares for the skin. Besides, it cleverly appeals to the ideal of the human race to slow down aging or age gracefully. You must have noticed, they advertise their glycerin content more so for anti-aging properties than moisturizing.
That's a brilliant insight, Dr. Freud. The brand has aged gracefully indeed. Some of your theories have not though. How about your seduction theory?
The seduction theory, as I formulated it in the 1890s, was based on my clinical observations of patients suffering from hysteria and other neuroses. I discovered that many of them seemed to harbor repressed memories of sexual experiences from childhood, often involving adults, sometimes even family members. These early encounters or seductions left deep psychic scars. These memories buried within the unconscious would later resurface in adulthood as hysterical symptoms. The theory was groundbreaking at the time, but
also very disturbing, especially the methods you resorted to.
Pardon?
Well, your patients were subjected to extreme pressure to reproduce infantile sexual abuse scenes that you were convinced had been repressed into the unconscious. You yourself reported later that even after morbid reenactments of sexual abuse on the patients, they never displayed hysteria, which may have implied suppression of such memories. That is appalling, doctor. What do you say to that?
I don't recollect any such experiments conducted by me.
Maybe Dr. Freud has some suppressed memories of his own to deal with.
Scheiß Arschloch.
Language. You are indeed a fascinating man, Dr. Freud. To whom do you owe this intellect?
I think, my parents. My father was a wool merchant, and although he wasn't a wealthy man, he provided for us. I was the youngest of 8 children. I was especially close to my mother, actually.
How wonderful! Moving on. Would you?
My mother, Amalia was much younger than my father, 20 whole years, in fact, and she had an enormous influence on me. I was her favorite child. She called me her golden Siggy.
Yes, that's great. Now, coming to Eros and
I really loved my mother, and she loved me too. One of my brothers was a year older than her. Oh, I was so jealous of him. I loved her, and I despised any man who would come near her.
That will be enough, Doctor. I reckon we know now where the Oedipus complex comes from.
Pardon me? Every single person feels this way. You're telling me you've never thought of your mother as your...
No comments. But it is really surprising that you never became a wool merchant.
Why?
Well, we all know how badly you wanted to take over your dad's role. Well, moving right ahead. We'd like you to express your thoughts on this particular ad campaign, Dr. Freud. It featured a golden cigarette packet being lowered into a grave with the message, "Some people have known to die in the search for gold." A very amusing way to capture the pleasure yet peril of smoking, don't you think?
Indeed. This campaign taps into 2 powerful human drives, Eros, which represents life, and Thanatos, which represents death. The golden cigarette represents pleasure and desire, while the grave symbolizes the inevitable outcome, death. Humans are naturally curious about death. Even though we try to avoid thinking about it, Eros is the drive for life and pleasure, and Thanatos is the pull towards death. The cigarette ad remarkably combines both. It offered pleasure but also reminded people of the danger, making the ad emotionally charged and effective. People often seek pleasure, even if it risks their life. Like smoking.
They do indeed. Sometimes smoking, sometimes cocaine. Remember, Doctor?
To each their own, perhaps. I did suggest its use as an antidepressant for a few years, I believe, but I have moved on since.
And why would that be? Maybe because of your friend who you suggested cocaine as an alternative to morphine, who then died of an acute case of cocaine psychosis?
Could we exclude this part? Off record, as you say?
Why off the record? Is it too depressing? We all know how proficient you are with antidepressants. Well, moving right ahead. We'd like you to express your thoughts on this particular ad campaign, Dr. Freud.
British culture, much like many others, has long held death at arm's length. However, when death is brought into the public consciousness, whether through advertising or cultural symbols, it shakes the foundation of this repression. Grabs one's attention inevitably. Evidence of my brilliance truly.
Oh, we know your brilliance, all right. We're surprised you agreed to a chat with us. Us, women who oppose change, receive passively, and add nothing of their own. As stated by your brilliance in 1925.
I remember. I am surprised too. Well, thank you for having me here. Your name, miss?
Alia?
Oh, my. That is so similar to my mother's name. Amalia. Aaliyah. Wow. Are you free after this, Aaliyah? We could grab coffee or...
And that should do it for today. Join us in the next episode where we deep dive into more of your favorite theorists and learn about consumer behavior. Thank you.
Give my regards to Mrs. Sonica. I am, amazed to see how many women have assumed roles of authority in the future. You all must have overcome the, penis envy, I presume.